The expletive names for God. The Shem Mephorash is derived from the Hebrew language. And the Shem HaMephorash, literally meant, the explicit names for God. And these expletives were called the unutterable names for God. And historically they were referred to as vulgarisms, and as two-word expletives which were used for the name of God. And they were typically too vulgar to be mentioned by many as the name for God. Therefore typically any too vulgar name for God in any language was considered disrespectful to God. Especially many of the vulgar swear words that are mentioned in the English language. Therefore many scholars in Judaism began to associate the Tetragrammaton or the two acronym YHWH and JHVH to be the Shem Mephorash. But these two acronyms, they aren't swear words. Because they have two very different meanings, and they are used as a Hebrew acronym for the true name for Elu. Furthermore, these two acronyms aren't really swear words. Furthermore, these two acronyms have been deciphered to mean the name for God, which is Yahweh, and Jehovah. But these acronyms could possibly means that Elu'hymn is Elu, whose name is Hayah, than any other name. But over time, the Jesuits, and those in Jesuitism, and Christendom, and Judaism, and Jewish mysticism, and those who are into the Kabbalah, and Satanism, and the other religious societies, they have expanded the term, the Shem Mephorash, to signify other hidden names for God, and also for the most embarrassing names for God. But mostly for the synonymous names for God, and also for the theophorically names for God. And also for many of the used vulgar swear words, for the names of God that contains 12, letter and 22, and 42, and 72 letters. And furthermore for those names that have words which are derived from scriptural passages like those from Exodus 14. Like the mentioning of God as the angel of the Lord. And so on. Friends, uttering the hidden names of God was traditionally viewed as being disrespectful, and in folklore it was regarded as the ultimate taboo, and it was interpreted as an act of defiance. And according to the occultists, and the Satanists, they would embrace these names, and they would chant these names during their rituals, and also these phrases were adopted into their satanic worship. And many such phrases were adopted in their worship alongside their ritualistic chanting, like the phrase, "Hail Satan," which was done to invoke a sense of dramatic transgression, rebellion, and symbolic inversion. Friends, in biblical times the name, Canaanite, was used to describe someone who had participated in a sexual relationship with their mother. And the expletive that was used today, it describes such and such an individual as being despicable, but such and such expletives that was used were too harsh. So that many religious societies and many individuals refrain from uttering such words to recognize the name of God thereby. Therefore the head of these societies ruled that these names were unutterable. And that anyone who uses such and such a word would be fined and even excommunicated from their assemblies. And such a person who uses such expletives for the name of God could be found culpable of a large fine. Furthermore, if someone were caught expressing these expletives in public, in any way they would be in danger of jail time. Friends, below are some of the names that were considered suspect. Please be advised that some of these words are offensive to Christians and other religious societies. And that one should be use their own discretion, and they should choose not to repeat such and such a word in public, because in some countries it may constitutes a misdemeanor and it may warrant a fine or jail time. Friends, even though these words are expressed in disgust of God and Jesus, many unsuspecting individuals peradventure doesn't realize that these names are actually the true names for God. And that this is what the Shem Mephorash actually means. Friends, some time ago I was looking at some ancient pictograph from the Caribbean islands online. And I found this telling pictograph that the historians claimed that they could not decipher. And that the local Caribbean people believe was drawn by the indigenous Taínos people who lived on these islands some 6 centuries ago. And that the local island people claimed that the true interpretation to these pictograph were lost. But the more that I looked at them, that I knew what they were right away, and what they actually meant. Friends, these ancient pictograph and carvings were written on stones. And one of them in particular resembled a male figure with a target in the middle of the abdomen. And it had 2 ears that were protruding like a male penile appendage. Friends, the more that I examined them, I knew that these pictographs were indicative of a pictograph which resembled a figure of God. And furthermore, they likely resembled the true depiction of the biblical Cain, whom had a mark which resembled a target and which was placed on his abdomen. Meaning that this could possibly be the mark of Cain. When Cain was marked by Elu'hymn, for killing his brother. And the other depiction, it resembled a figure with two penile appendages for his ears. That resembles someone with a dick head. Then I surmised that this pictograph was part of the Shem Amphorish, and that they were the pictographs which resembled a figure of God and Cain. And which stood as a depiction for the name of God, whom was the first Canaanite, meaning the first one whom had a sexual relationship with his mother. And later on Cain his son also slept with his mother. Friends, this is why there is this Hebrew word which is called the Shem Amphorish, which stands for the expletive names for God. Just to name a few: expletive, a Canaanite; the word dickhead, the word Judas; the word mother lovers, the word snake, or a serpent, and so on. Friends, there are millions of others names for God. And some of them are too vulgar to mention here. Therefore, for fear of being censored, I dare not mention them here. Friends, there are millions of other names for God. And many of them are vulgarism or swear words. And many more are theophorical names. And many of them are expletives. And they are too vulgar to utter here. Friends, the worshipping of God is called idolatry, and the praising and the lauding of Jesus is called Jesuilatry. But the worshipping and acknowledgement of Elu'hymn is right. Because the fear of the odd is right. And the embracing of the odd is wise. And the understanding of the names of the odd is the beginning of wisdom. Because he is the only true name that is given among men, in whom we must embrace in order to be saved. Thank you, Elu'hymn. Bless the holy name of E. Because he is the Almighty E, and he is named Holy E. And he is the odd of all the heavens and the earth. And he is the holy prophet called Elu'hymn. And Elu'hymn. And he is the is Christ. Thank you, E. Praise E. The odd. Thank you, E. Thank you. To be continued. The end.